welcome to today's webinar. I'm your host, Phil Derrida, Lasallian Programs Manager for the Christian Brothers Conference. Thrilled to be with you this afternoon, evening, depending on where you are in our Lasallian world. We have Lasallians joining us from all across the country, from coast to coast. And a shout out to our international participants too. We are a truly global Lasallian mission. The sun never sets. On behalf of Christian Brothers Conference, it's my distinct privilege to host today's presentation, Fostering a Culture of Vocation, the call of everyone within our Lasallian family, with our presenters, Brother David Coretti, FSC, and Mr. Chris Swain. Brother David Coretti, FSC, EDD, currently serves as the Director of Vocation Ministry for the District of San Francisco, New Orleans, where he works in liaison with the Lasallian schools of the district and also the candidates discerning their vocation with the brothers. Brother's an alumnus of St. Mary's College of California, the University of Notre Dame, and the University of San Francisco, where he completed research in the governance relationships between boards of trustees and religious congregations, within Catholic education. His time as a student at St. Mary's College of California greatly inspired his discernment and his eventual commitment to 24 years of life as a De La Salle Christian brother. He has served St. Mary's College High School, Berkeley, Sacred Heart Cathedral Preparatory in San Francisco, and St. Mary's College in campus ministry, and as a faculty member within high school religious studies and mathematics departments. Brother David currently serves as vice chair of the Board of Trustees at St. Mary's College and is also a trustee at Christian Brothers High School, Sacramento. Chris Swain currently serves as the director of the Office of Lasallian Vocation Ministry for the De La Salle Christian Brothers in North America. He facilitates communication and collaborative projects related to the promotion of the brothers' vocation, as well as fostering a broader culture of vocation through his office with Christian Brothers Conference. He has a background in communication and education, where he spent 10 years prior to this current role as a teacher, campus minister, and coach in Catholic schools in the Lasallian charism. Chris would likely tell you his most important vocation is that of being a husband to his wife, Kathleen, for 8 years, and father to his 2 children, James and Annabeth. It is my distinct privilege to welcome our 2 speakers, Brother David Coretti and Chris Swain.
Great. Thanks so much, Phil. Thanks for that introduction, and thanks to our colleague, Sarah Layton, Director of Education and Formation at Christian Brothers Conference, for the invitation to speak on this significant topic, which is foundational to our Lasallian charism and mission. Before we begin our presentation, we'll start with a prayer.
Let us remember that we are in the holy presence of God. We invite you to take a minute and listen to the familiar parable of the sower from the Gospel of Mark.
Again, he began to teach beside the sea. Such a very large crowd gathered around him that he got into a boat on the sea and sat there, while the whole crowd was beside the sea on the land.
He began to teach them many things in parables, and in his teaching he said to them,
Listen, a sower went out to sow, and as he sowed, some seed fell on the path, and birds came and ate it up.
Other seed fell on rocky ground, where it did not have much soil, and it sprang up quickly, since it had no depth of soil. And when the sun rose, it was scorched, and since it had no root, it withered away.
Other seed fell among thorns, and thorns grew up and choked it, and it yielded no grain.
Other seed fell into good soil and brought forth grain, growing up and increasing and yielding 30 and 60 and 100-fold.
And he said, Let anyone with ears to hear listen.
Saint John Baptist de La Salle, pray for us.
Pray for us.
Live Jesus in our hearts forever.
Forever. Thanks again for joining us this evening. We know some of you are joining right after a full day of teaching and being present with your educational communities, and others are juggling trying to listen during your commute, getting dinner on the table, or other evening routines. Thank you for making the time to show up and engage with us.
Absolutely. Wherever you are, we hope you're comfortable, and we're glad to have you here with us.
Part one will invite us to surface shared understandings that hopefully will open up for us a broader definition of vocation and a culture of vocation. While part two will invite us to consider the response and responsibility each of us has personally and we have communally within our local settings. As Phil said, please at any time put questions into the Q&A, and at various moments we'll ask you to contribute to the chat and give voice to your lived experience and expertise. We hope that you walk away from tonight's webinar with a new or remembered insight, an aha moment to hold on to, and some concrete next faithful steps that you and your community can embrace and further animate a culture of vocation.
In order to do that, we felt it was pretty important to begin with a definition of vocation. And though there are many quotes that are inspirational and many different types of ways in which each of us could provide words to do this particular definition of vocation comes out of one of the more recent circulars of the Institute, Circular 475, that has inspired a lot of this presentation. So I know it's in front of you, or maybe if you're driving in your car, I'll read it very quickly to you. Vocation is a lifelong process, and it is not reduced to the one individual call. Rather, it is seen as a succession of calls and responses, a dialogue in freedom between God and each human being, which is concretized in a mission that must be discovered continuously in the different stages of life and in relation to new realities. I know when I saw this definition of vocation, it certainly sounded like it fit us as a Lasallian family. Because I think we see in the background the life of somebody who's pretty significant to all of us and that entire story, because it was de La Salle himself who articulates that his own life was a succession of smaller calls and responses that asked him to say yes. And I think we see in our own experiences that vocation, when we see it best, is that true dialogue and freedom, where we're called to be our best selves and who God has meant us to be.
Awesome. And we'd invite you to take a moment and share in the chat, typing something about what aspect of this definition resonates with your own experience. What jumps out to you about this understanding? Maybe it's a word, maybe it's a phrase, maybe it's a point of connection. And take a second and add that to the chat. Awesome. A mission that must be discovered. The idea of being discovered continuously in various stages of life. That's profound. Lifelong process, refined at different stages of your life. Lifelong. In relation to new realities. Lifelong. A series of calls and responses. The sense that life unfolds and takes us places we didn't expect. A succession of calls and responses. The idea that vocation is a succession of calls and responses. A journey like life. A journey we're on over a lifetime. Trying to figure out what's next. Newness every day. God meeting us in the present. In relation to new realities. Thank you for sharing what resonated with you. Brother David mentioned this circular from hope to commitment, understanding Lasallian vocations. I was about to do Brother David's favorite thing and take my copy of the text and wave it in front of you. So Circular 475 was born out of the 45th General Chapter in this call to celebrate Lasallian vocations in a year of Lasallian vocation. And through a process of dialogue with people all over the world, this document came together. And so it's really grounded in listening to a lived experience of Lasallians and what they have to share about their sense of God's call in their life, and defining this understanding as well as practices and opportunities within our Lasallian family to further foster a culture of vocation. And it's rich with insights, and I think it paints a promising horizon for us as a Lasallian network and as a Lasallian family. And so, as Brother David said, a lot of our framing for tonight comes through that. And one of the ways that the circular uses or provides a definition of vocation is through kind of three different levels it invites us to see vocation through. And the first of those levels is a human level. And that level is, right, accessible. It starts with all, which is also, right, very Pauline, very scriptural, but it's a very human level. Unique talents, what are our gifts, how God or how individuals choose to use their gifts, their purposes, their purpose, their passion, and contribute to the betterment of our society. We all are invited to respond and engage on that human level of vocation.
I think that's the blessing of these three levels outlined in the circular. The fact that not every single one of us has a point of insertion here. Every single one of us can and is called to discern vocation, whether we look at it through the lens of faith or not. So I think that the circular has a great wisdom and recognizes that we serve a population within the Lasallian family that is wider than just merely Christian or even faith-based.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so there is that human perspective. There is also that religious perspective. That is this divine call and response that's rooted in the scriptures of many traditions. And then within our Catholic, Christian, and Lasallian tradition, we have this relationship with a God that we're called to be connected to. And the question posed is, how are we attuned to ways in which God loves us and we're seeking ways to love back? And to discover that way of loving God and loving others is maybe a way to discover our vocation, some different language, but very much through the circular, and the invitation is through these layers of vocation applying to all, vocation on a religious and faith level, and vocation in our Catholic Christian tradition as well.
And also in particular, the fact that we find ourselves in very distinct and different circumstances and context, right? There's no exactly one way to do vocation ministry at any, or create a culture of vocation at any particular school that is going to necessarily be the perfect one for another community as well. So I think that's also another way in which we are blessed as a Lasallian family. Particularly when we come into vocation ministry, I always love the fact that the symbol of our identity is the star, the sign of faith. The fact that we address a situation and we do this work with this hope, with this faith that it is going to make a particular difference. Like the wise men followed that same star, not knowing what was at the end. And so another foundational document for us, just for your own information, is the actual Rule of the Brothers itself. The rule, while it's a document for the brothers, it is very intentional that it focuses us as brothers, and then thus as a Lasallian family outwardly. It is an inclusive document from the perspective of ensuring that the Institute and the brothers and all that we welcome to be with us in this Lasallian mission. I don't want you to get distracted by this being just particularly about or voice as the brothers. There are two sections that particularly address vocation ministry, and in a phrase that is used, the pastoral ministry of vocations, a way that we might not necessarily use that here in the United States, but across the Institute, you'll hear vocation ministry addressed as the pastoral ministry of vocations. So looking at Rule 84 in the rule, the entire people of God is responsible for awakening vocations in the church. So the brothers make this charism known, and this charism is then itself shared. Okay, so it reminds us as brothers, as Lasallian family, that we are here as intermediaries, here to accompany young people, here to accompany one another in our quest to understand our Lasallian vocation.
Yeah, and I particularly draw on inspiration from this line in the rule in particular. The entire people of God is responsible for awakening vocations. And thinking about this, we're called to be a people of mission through our baptism in a shared identity with a common mission to awaken, to rouse, to stir, to spark, to discover, as well as to revive, to renew, to re-enliven, remembering that it's not just something that happens one time, but this ongoing process throughout our lives invites continual renewal, continual conversion, continual transformation. And we each have a responsibility for that, both in the adult community and among the young people entrusted to us.
Because each and every single one of us, from whatever perspective we are, has a very unique contribution to make. It takes all of us to do this, and I think you'll hear that as a refrain through all that we say. This is not just merely a responsibility for brothers to take care of brother vocations or something like that, or Lasallian partners to take care of partner vocations, or it's incumbent upon all of us to ensure that we are all contributing to building a culture of vocation that supports every single one of us in being in discernment with that God who's loving us into being who we are meant to be. A subpoint to section 84 has also here, I think, the actual foundational line, which calls us to this, even this notion of culture of vocations, so that the rule asks the Institute to promote a culture which takes vocations into account. This isn't just something that we pulled out of the sky. It's not just a phrase that is a jargony phrase. It is a phrase that has its roots in our identifying documents. So if you're ever wondering where and why a culture of vocations come from, it's even in our most recent rule. So in terms of this, go for it, Chris.
Yeah, absolutely. So the challenge and opportunity we're sharing with you, right? One of the end hopes of what fostering a culture of vocation looks like is this notion of sharing God's love and greatest gift to each of us, and understanding that has to take place and culture has to happen within a community, right? Culture doesn't happen in isolation. Culture doesn't happen as an individual. For the brothers, right? Brother implies relationship. You can't brother alone. And to that end, being Lasallian requires community. Being Lasallian involves relationship together and by association. In relationship, in community, is how we foster culture and how we invite and encourage and accompany one another in this experience that we share.
So as Circular 475 somewhat sifts out in a number of descriptors, these are some phrases that I find to be evocative of culture of vocation, that it is a social environment, an atmosphere. It is created by members of a community and or an educational work, right? So it's actually concretized in people that promotes the understanding of human life as a vocation. Vocation is the lens through which we understand our meaning and our purpose. It's a culture that enables each individual, every person in the community, to enter that process where a sense of meaning allows them to discover their passion and their purpose in life. I think that this culture, the way it's described, is something that is that space, is that place of where all of us are allowed to be that person we need to be, who God is calling us to be.
Yeah, and not to be a walking advertisement for reading and spending time with Circular 475, but Brother David just pulled a handful of these quotes out to put together. There's such a richness to what the document has to say, and ways of framing and thinking about it and inviting you in from where you sit. And
So
so
maybe this is part of our homework that we give you, that if you haven't looked at Circular 475 yet, that you take a chance to do so.
yeah. The invitation again is to use the chat feature and offer a comment on either how you relate to one of these pieces of a culture of vocation, or if you had to define what a culture of vocation is using your own words, if you had to give a simple definition, what would you say? And so invite you to take a minute and put that in the chat for us. Awesome. How do you define a culture of vocation? Promoting pursuit of passion and purpose. Members of a community coming together to accompany each other. A place where people know they were made for greatness and learn how to pursue it. The process of discovering the plan of your life. A culture of vocation encourages everyone in a community to listen to where God is calling them to serve. Culture of vocation because it reminds each individual that they are known in their uniqueness. I love that we discover our purpose as opposed to inventing it. Both as an individual and as part of the collective, we work together to affirm one another's passion and purpose in life. Where all members of the community recognize their purpose outside of themselves and purposes outside. Inclusive by its very nature. Allows for each individual to be their authentic self. A culture where the skill of discernment is passed on and where establishing the conditions where young people can listen to God. Empowers members of the community to find meaning in their personal response to love and serve using their unique gifts. Awesome.
Amen to that. It's nice. I like to see that we don't have some just passive webinar attendees here, you know?
Yes, no, awesome responses.
It's wonderful. I think that's one of the things we are best for is in the Lasallian world is creating that environment. I almost always think that Lasallian is more an environment, definitely, than it is a product. One of the items from Circular 475 that we've always felt, that Chris and I have agreed that is something that even makes us think, is this idea of the four terrains. And the four terrains themselves are built on on the notion of two sets of axes or so.
Yeah, and the axis are an emphasis on vocation ministry, that there's things happening or there's nothing happening. And the other axis is an emphasis on only the brother's vocation, or an emphasis on all vocations, inclusive of the brother's vocation as well. And so part of the design of the circular was inviting people from around the world to kind of comment on where they found themselves individually, their communities, their religious communities, their educational communities, to situate themselves. And these four areas emerged. And if you're a math teacher, apologies that whoever put together this document did not label the quadrants correctly. And so this is how the document does it. But it points towards the fourth terrain, and thinking about our prayer, the parable of the sower, using that imagery of soil and terrain. The fourth terrain is really the horizon to be inspired towards, is the aspirational aim of the circular, and the invitation for us to move in that direction from the places we find ourselves.
Whether this is the first time you're seeing this description or this visual, or whether it's something you're returning to, I can definitely say for myself that I see this as a validation of experience. I think I've seen each and every single one of these terrains in my years as a brother. I have seen ways in which the brothers have forgotten, I mean, unintentionally or so, and just put the focus on the brothers. And I've seen lay partners also somewhat do the same thing too. Like the brothers are past, they're not here, or they're wherever they are. So the fact is that this entire document, this focus on Lasallian vocations, asks us to consider the importance of the diversity of the Lasallian family, because it's all of us together. It's not just one or either side, and not that there's a side. And I always thought that it was kind of interesting that the major emphasis on the vocation of the brother and major emphasis on Lasallian vocations, like the brothers aren't a Lasallian vocation. It's just like you don't want to write major emphasis on non-brother vocations or other Lasallian vocations. Come on. Semantics are hard in translation, aren't they?
Yes, they are.
So this other second challenge we send out to you is this notion of shaping and supporting local efforts. And how do you shape and support local efforts in order to best serve and respond to different needs and different audiences?
Yeah, and in our lexicon, we frequent the language, meet people where they are. How, from where we each find ourselves, can we give ourselves permission to be where we are, right? Sometimes we have a conversation about vocation, or have a conversation around formation or faith, and it's threatening or anxiety or stressful because we think we should be someplace else, and we need to give ourselves permission to be where we are, and recognize that people are in different places in their own journeys, and look towards that shared horizon together. And how can we journey together? And how can we take steps together personally and programmatically with intention towards that? And I think that sense of there's different needs, and we need to meet them and meet people where they are, and go from there.
So as we look at this as Lasallian professionals, there's a question of how do we best engender openness to even the topics of vocation, And I would offer us this question. Do our students see us as people who are living in response to God's call in our lives? All of us as Lasallian professionals. Would our students say that they hear us speaking, they hear us acting, they hear us uh, witnessing to the fact that we see ourselves as living in response to God's call in our lives? And then I also would put it this way: do they see us as people who discern and live questions into answers? I've always felt that some questions are so big that they weren't meant to be answered immediately, but that we had to live those questions, like Rainer Maria Rilke said. And I would say this for ourselves: do we see this in one another? Do we see ourselves in this way as well? Because our students are not going to be able to understand or come to understand or feel supported in discerning their vocation if they're not surrounded by examples of people who are willing to be seen as such, to witness to that. And it's not that you have to run around the school, obviously, and say, or run around your community and say vocation, vocation, vocation. But how are they seeing us as people who live in response to God's call in our lives? And how do they see us as people of discernment? So that's our next challenge to you. How and where do you see the opportunities to engender openness in students and school personnel, one another, being accompanied in the search for meaning and belonging? So we're going to turn this over to a little conversation.
Awesome. You know, Brother David, last week I had the privilege accompanying the San Francisco, New Orleans, Johnston Institute folks, and I ran into some former colleagues from Justin Siena in Napa, and made me think of all the awesome folks there. And I'm going to be out there in the springtime. But anyway, I saw that Stephanie Roybal is on our call, and I on this webinar, and I really thought it'd be great to hear from her. So do you think we can make her magically appear?
I think you can. But it's only if she turns on her camera.
Give me a second.
Welcome, Stephanie.
Awesome. How are you, Stephanie?
I'm doing well. How about you? It's been a while.
Yes, good to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Yes, thank you for having me.
And so I want to invite you and all of the participants to answer these questions. I'm just going to invite you to answer them out loud, and everyone else to reflect on them on their own. And there's an activity called the 9 Whys. We're going to keep it to 3 whys, just for the sake of time, but I think the point will come across. And so I'm just going to simply ask you to answer the question, why does a culture of vocation matter to you?
So I think the culture of vocation creates our community at Justin Siena. It is something that brings us generally together, gives us a way to see our own sort of piece in the cog that, or see ourselves as a cog in this giant machine. And when something is off or it's not working the way that it's supposed to, or maybe it's just tired and needs a little bit of grease or something, the machine doesn't work as well as it could. So for us to create a culture of vocation where we are understanding every single one of us has a special piece or a special part to play in what makes our community tick and what makes it work, is really powerful. Making sure that everybody knows they're here for a reason, that they, their participation and their presence, honestly, just their presence, makes us a better and more well-oiled machine.
Great. And I want to follow up with that by asking you, why does that matter to you?
So it matters to me because, okay, for me personally, like this is, this vocation of mine, is my way of making the world around me a better place. The students entrusted to my care are going to pick up where I've left off and take it forward to continue to also make it a better place. I think we all have that responsibility. And I think modeling for students in particular, what it means to be someone who like serves others and lives for a greater purpose will move things forward for us collectively.
And one more question. Why does that matter to you?
When it comes down to it, this is sort of, we're all part of, God's plan, God's creation. Hopefully we can do our best to take care of it, to make it better for those who come after us, and to continue to sort of live that story that God is creating in us.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you, Stephanie.
You're welcome.
for those insights and for putting up with Brother David and I.
Hey, I'm just a work in progress here.
We're all just a work in progress, brother.
And I also saw on the participant list while I was in Metairie, Louisiana, and I didn't have a chance to get over to Covington, but I really would have loved to see Jeff Ramone, and I saw that Jeff's on the call, so I'm wondering if Jeff can magically appear for us as well, and maybe we can say bye to Stephanie.
Oh. See you later.
See you soon. Bye.
Yes. Hello, Jeff.
Hey.
So I think you're on to the questions I might be asking.
I think so. I think so.
But hey, Jeff, why does a culture of vocation matter to you?
Not to say what Stephanie was just talking about, but I think the first thing for me is aligning with purpose outside of myself and something outside of myself. Not to say that I look at myself as a selfish person, to use the word self a bunch, but it sort of grounds me and gives me that sense of purpose that's not for me. Am I good at it all the time? No, but it at least is there to fall back upon. And then speaking of the community in general, I think it's really similar for having a culture of vocation in a community is to be able to work together, again, beyond ourselves.
And why does that matter to you?
Shocking. Okay. When we're grounded, I think when we're grounded in something, life happens, as Circular says, life happens, and responding to the way that life happens, and by having something that we're grounded in, by being able to think about our vocations, to why we're here, why we're called, it allows us to respond to various pits and peaks that life happens and life throws at you. And as a school community, in particular, students, faculty alike, all of us go through those pits, peaks. And then by, again, recognizing our vocation and being able to just pause, perhaps also, I think about like the line in the Romero prayer that's kind of Romero's words-ish about being able to do something and do it well. So grounding us in something, and then when life happens, being able to, I'd say, do life well, but do life well.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Jeff, for
One more why there?
Oh
no. For the sake of time, we will call barbecue sauce there and say thank you to Jeff and keep the conversation and presentation going. So thank you, Jeff.
A discussion of vocation, ministry, and culture vocation cannot come without acknowledging that there are awkwardnesses. in vocation ministry. I know that there are ways in which sometimes our church, our community doesn't do vocation ministry right or well. I can tell you personal stories of whether that means that brothers get forgotten when our church talks about vocation, or even situations where, like when I was a young person discerning, there was some awkwardnesses in some of the vocation ministers that I talked to earlier on. And so we all have personal experiences in Catholic vocation ministry. And if we're only, again, talking about priests and religious, we as a church, we as a Lasallian family, we're doing this wrong. Okay? We're not doing it right. We need to do this correctly. And vocation ministry isn't as simple as handing out a random brochure to students. Okay? That's not the way vocation ministry is done. Vocation ministry, our institute reminds us, is done through accompaniment, through listening, through relationship. Okay? So there's ways in which we might need to consider, well, on one hand, embracing some of the awkwardness in some of the conversations, is when we ask people important questions, that can be a little challenging. But also to be able to think ahead and think about who we're talking to and how we're approaching things, that might take some of the awkwardness out of it.
Yeah, and so what we wanted to offer next, in addition to your homework around potentially having a read of the circular, are these two questions. And the first question is, how would you assess your school's culture of vocation at the current moment? And kind of the invitation of this question and the question to follow are, could you take these two questions and have a conversation with a colleague at your ministry about them? The second question is, what does an ideal culture of vocation look like for your local school community? And I think Phil will magically make those two questions appear in the chat in just a minute. And so between those two questions of how would you assess and what does ideal look like, thinking about engaging with some colleagues around those questions, engaging with the district vocation director or vocation team when they come and visit. In some places, there's animators or vocation animation teams, and making that a topic of conversation and dialogue to surface those things to aim for in the ideal, as well as recognizing kind of the current landscape and what are the next steps to take to move towards that, right? And so I think they're really kind of practical questions to figure out where you are, where we are as a community, and where we're headed.
Coming back to the notion of engendering openness to vocation and being seen as people of vocation and discernment, as people who accompany young people, I really invite you to consider, how can we be quick to go to the topics of vocation and discernment? Are those words, are the other thoughts attached to them, are the active questions, are those on the tips of your tongue? How do you show students that you're a person of discernment? Do you invite them into your thought processes, obviously about things that you've discerned, that maybe you've even reflected on, that discernment? Obviously not your most personal discernments ever, because we are the adults in the community, but how can we get and be quick to go there in terms of vocation and discernment?
Yeah, and so what does that look like in terms of incorporating that into prayer at the beginning of class, or on the PA, in terms of storytelling, in terms of formal programming, and spaces that you have a captive audience, orientation or retreats or service immersions, and weaving in not just the service, but a reflection on what that means for using and sharing your gifts and talents with the world's needs. What does that look like in terms of invitations that you are offering colleagues, or encouragement around areas, affirmations, and how are we really in this together. And I think so often we get caught up in our little area of work and ministry. And we need to remember, right, first De La Salle brought the brothers into community together. And that piece of, you know, Brother Robert Schuller has said it, and others have said it. The chief innovation of the founder was bringing the brothers together and doing education in community. And so that piece that the adults are on the same page first and foremost. And so how can we bring that to bear and bring that to light in our local settings, and particularly recognizing the language and experiences of colleagues and young people, and how are we sharing stories, and how are we getting to know one another, and how are we breaking these things open and building bridges so that we're making them accessible and relevant to both our colleagues and to young people as well.
We know that as a Lasallian family, that anything that we do for the mission is done best in community. And we're going to be more successful anytime that we're supportive of one another and do that together. These are just some broader suggestions that we might have. You know, if you're coming here for a bunch of ideas of how to exactly do this, I mean, again, we're trying to address local context. But in these culture of vocation initiatives, a lot of which come directly from the circular itself, there's some great lists for consideration in there. But you might consider some of these very different options for ways in which you can engage and integrate culture of vocation initiatives into your school community, into your religious community as well. So I know that providing opportunities for our professional staff, our teachers, our staff members to share their stories with one another, sharing one story and doing it well is a piece of professional development, and giving people space to practice those. I know a couple of our schools have done things where they've shared their own stories, their vocation stories, in a faculty retreat, in a professional development session there. So how do you integrate vocation throughout prayer? You know, many of our schools have PA prayer, have school-wide prayer services, have particular days and things, you know, that are dedicated to prayer. Where do we bring vocation into that?
Yeah, and I think there's lots of opportunities to look at a calendar and put some things out there and come up with a plan. And so much of it isn't doing something extra or new or different. It's plugging into things that are already in existence with an eye towards what that looks like. And I think one of the pieces for me that was brought home when you were speaking, Brother David, was, you know, there's a quote that God calls me through others, for others, with others. And that our experience of God's call is in the context of community. And we can think of in our own lives the people who have broken that open for us, have been a voice of God to us. And sometimes those people are our peers, sometimes they're mentors or teachers or coaches. And it's an easy exercise to, and a prayerful one, to consider that. Maybe I went into, actually I did, I went into teaching, and I blame my mother because she was a lifelong kindergarten teacher. And so that experience with her were the roots of my vocation as an educator. And so I think we all have those pieces of our story that can be shared and that we can share with one another in building up this culture.
I think, as you say, Chris, that for certain, to use springtide language, maybe I didn't use it when I was a young person. It didn't exist yet, but the fact that we've been blessed to have trusted adults in our lives who were those examples and mentors for us. And I'm grateful that that has continued even in my years as a brother as well. We all have our lists or so. And I think that's a great reminder, if I can just also show another a photo that makes me think of how we are responsible for and with one another. Three good people in my life, and people who I have seen, Stephanie Roybal, as you said earlier, Brother Matthew Quintella, and Joe Welling. Three people who I've seen support one another in their exploration of their own vocations. This photo taken at actually Brother Matthew's first vows makes me think of that every time I see it, and that we in the Lasallian family, it's our charge. It takes all of us, that wherever we find ourselves, in an official capacity, to work with people across the district or in the region on vocation ministry, or whether you find yourself in a school, in charge of a school, teaching science or whatever not, or if you're a brother in a community, or you're a young person in discernment of your vocation, it doesn't really matter. Because as Stephanie said, we do have a responsibility to those who come after us. I think I like to say this to a lot of people, that we who are here right now are the ones who are charged with finding the Lasallian family of the future. Because we certainly know there are students who are going to need Lasallian education. They're going to need those experiences and those places and those environments where they're going to grow. So we are charged with the finding of the Lasallian family of the future. And it's not just the brothers, it's not just the partners, it takes all of us. It's a diversity. So God provides us a diversity of personalities and perspectives, and God knows I'm one of those. But the fact is that we are charged with finding the Lasallian family of the future.
Yeah, onward and forward. The invitation is there for each of us to take up this cause. And one of the pieces of the circular, the invitation of the Institute of our global Lasallian family, is around, right? We want to affirm and help young people and others discover their vocation, whether that be as educator or doctor or whatever professional vocation, who they're called to be in their life, right? We're called to do something, but we're also called to be people. And so what is that call for us? And then the other piece is, right, this piece that Brother David speaks of, this invitation to a Lasallian vocation, one that's grounded in faith and service and community, one that calls us into association for the education of young people, one that invites us to a mission of evangelization, one that invites us to the margins of society, and to see those spaces transformed by our witness and our ministry there. And so we know, and I think most participants on the webinar know, the transformative power of this Lasallian educational call. And we want to invite people to journey with us, to participate with us, to contribute to that, because our charism and mission is transformed by each of us and our unique vocations in our unique way that we share in community together, that we are all enriched because of it. And so I'm grateful for each of you taking the time this evening to be present, and grateful for your yes in your Lasallian commitment and your Lasallian vocation. We're happy to be resources to you and support to you. And it's a privilege to have the space and the forum that we've had tonight to talk with you. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Pleasure being with you, and look forward to seeing you another time soon.
All right, gentlemen, thank you so very much. We did have a mention in the comments. The USCCB intends this primarily toward religious life, but National Vocation Awareness Week is November 3rd through 9th this year. Remind me, good brothers, brothers with a big B and little b, for us in celebrating our Lasallian vocations. That's in May towards our Founders Day, if I'm not mistaken. That like May 1st.
What we usually have in the national level is the National Religious Brothers Day, which is a celebration of the NRVC, the National Religious Vocation Conference. And I think most of our schools definitely have been wonderful at highlighting that day, May 1st, as well as then letting that slide right between the founder's birthday on April 30th into Founders Day on May 15th. So, hey, but don't confine it to a calendar, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
we
and
also did get a question. Oh, sorry, Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, I would add to that and to the point of National Vocation Awareness Week that we do have on brothersvocation.org a number of resources related to National Vocation Awareness Week and ways to participate and engage in that in the classroom, in looking at and inviting students to look at some different definitions of vocation, to watch some videos of vocation stories, and some other some prayer resources, some quotes are there on brothersvocation.org, National Vocation Awareness Week, if you're looking for particular things to participate in as well. And I think hopefully I answered the question in my kind of closing a little bit around what constitutes a Lasallian vocation, and I think that's something that right is significant for us to foster and nurture, while this understanding of vocation and this culture of vocation is wide and inclusive of that, as well as these other pieces as well.
Well, thank you for catching that question there, Chris, and answering it on the way out. This is fantastic. We are right up to our hour. Thank you for this jam-packed session, good brothers, with the big B and little b. Thank you, Brother David and Chris, for this presentation, this guided conversation about vocation. Each of us is called clearly to a vocation. Each of us is called to invite others to explore their vocation. Brothers and sisters, to young people entrusted to our care, and really, in reality, to each other. We're the extension, the echo of that ever-present whisper of his call to service, to bring our talents and our passion to the greatest needs. With faith and zeal, let's continue to invite each other to discern, reflect, and share. You never know if you're the messenger that calls someone you know to take the next step in exploring their deeper purpose. Thank you for your guidance in giving us those tools and the space in which to do that, gentlemen. Really appreciate that. Also invite you to mark your calendars. The next webinar in our fall series is coming up. We'll put that link in the chat as well. We are going to have Brother Anthony Baginski and Michael Sabatino, excuse me, talking to us on Monday, November 4th, 6 p.m. Eastern, 3 p.m. Pacific, about the concentration programs at LaSalle College High School and how they spark academic interest in sometimes overlooked average students. Really, no student is average. It's calling those students to be more sparked and enlivened by education. And so we encourage you to sign up for that webinar coming up very, very soon. And then, of course, another invitation, reach out to us. Please feel free to reach out to us and let us know about the subject matter you want to see in your next webinars. Let us know on our social media. Reach out to me in email. My email address is also in the chat. Again, thank you for joining us. Thank you for all you do for young people, the blessings that you are and that you continue to be in serving this awesome Lasallian mission. And as we always close, St. John Baptist de La Salle,
Pray for us.
live Jesus in our hearts.
Forever.